All right, buckle up, because we're diving into a listener-submitted article that's packed with startup wisdom, especially for those navigating choppy economic waters. We're talking about the concept of default alive versus default dead.
It's a bit blunt, but incredibly useful for cutting through the noise and really evaluating a startup's chances of, well, surviving.
Exactly. And you know what? This isn't just for companies staring down an economic downturn. This is foundational stuff, relevant whether the economy's booming or we're all bracing for impact. So for everyone listening, imagine this. Your startup, right here, right
Right.
now. Can it reach profitability based on its current trajectory without depending on another injection of funding?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that many founders, especially those caught up in the whirlwind of building and pitching, might shy away from.
Because who wants to think about their startup potentially failing?
Right.
But here's the thing, dodging that question, that's the real risk. Thankfully, there are tools to help us, like that calculator built by YC co-founder Trevor Blackwell. Have you seen that thing?
It's a great reality check. But even with something like that, it's amazing how often founders, even brilliant ones, struggle to truly internalize this default alive or default dead concept.
It's like they're so focused on taking the leap that they forget to pack a parachute.
Yeah.
And nobody expects the ground to appear so suddenly. Why do you think that is? What makes this such a hard concept for some founders to grasp?
Well, imagine the thrill of the fundraising game. You're pitching your heart out, securing funding rounds, riding that wave of momentum. It's intoxicating. It's easy to see how some founders might lose sight of the fundamental question, can this business actually sustain itself?
Especially, coming out of an accelerator like Y Combinator, where there's this almost palpable expectation of success leading into demo day. It's like everyone's holding their breath for that next round of funding.
Exactly. But the truth is, fundraising isn't some linear path where each round gets easier. More often than not, it gets progressively harder.
And that's where that inherent founder's optimism, while usually a great asset, can become a bit of a blind spot. Because, let's be honest, admitting your startup might be on a path to failure. That's not just about crunching numbers, it's deeply personal.
It is, and that fear is understandable. But think of it this way, confronting those numbers head on, that's true empowerment. It gives you the power to course correct, to make tough decisions from a position of strength, not desperation.
Okay, so we've talked about the founder's perspective, but let's switch gears and look at this from the investor's point of view. They're not just handing out cash for warm, fuzzy feelings.
Right. And this is where the concept of leverage comes into play, because a startup's default status, whether it's alive or dead, drastically shifts the power dynamic between the founders and those holding the purse strings.
So walk us through it. How do their incentives differ, especially regarding something like burn rate, which always seems to be a hot topic?
Well, founders, especially in the early days, are often laser focused on growth, sometimes at any cost. This often translates to a high burn rate, that go big or go home mentality, exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
Oh, tell me about it. I've been there. It's like riding a rocket without a fuel gauge. You're so focused on reaching the moon, you forget you might not have enough fuel to get back.
Precisely. And while that drive is admirable, investors, particularly venture capitalists, have a different perspective. They're managing a portfolio of companies, playing a numbers game. Their primary goal is to see a return on their investment, and their definition of a good return might not align with the founder's vision or timeline.
And therein lies the tension, right? The founder's passion for their vision versus the investor's need for a return. It's like they're speaking different languages sometimes.
Absolutely. And this difference in perspective can lead to some, well, tricky situations, especially when we're talking about burn rate. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, you know him, of
Ah,
course.
yeah.
He has this great essay where he talks about the kill or cure dynamic at play in many startup investments.
Kill or cure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a powerful way to put it. So for our listeners, the idea is that for a VC with a diverse portfolio, pushing for rapid, even risky growth makes sense. A few home runs can more than make up for a bunch of strikeouts.
Exactly. So while investors might not explicitly tell a founder to spend, 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 the incentives are kind of there, and founders, eager to please and prove themselves, might misinterpret subtle cues, using them as justification for aggressive spending.
Oh, I've seen that happen. It's like a game of telephone, where the message gets distorted with every whisper down the line. An investor might casually suggest, hey, have you thought about maybe ramping up your marketing efforts? And suddenly, the founder is like scaling up the team, throwing a ton of money at ad campaigns they can't really afford.
Precisely. And that's how a startup that looks good on paper, with impressive revenue growth and customer acquisition numbers, can still be teetering on the edge of collapse because those metrics, while important, don't always tell the whole story.
Right. It's not just about how fast you're growing, but also how efficiently and sustainably.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those other less glamorous but arguably more important metrics that founders should be paying attention to, the stuff that goes beyond the pitch deck.
Absolutely. Burn rate, of course, is a big one. But beyond that, we're talking about things like customer retention, the lifetime value of a customer, revenue expansion within existing accounts, and crucially, the unit economics of the business. Are you making money on each sale after accounting for all the costs?
And that's where so many founders get tripped up, right? That trap of thinking that spending more money will magically lead to product market fit.
The fatal pinch, some people call it. But it should be the other way around. Achieving product market fit is what justifies increased spending, not the other way around.
And unfortunately, we've seen firsthand how many founders don't reach out for help until they're already deep in that trap. They get so caught up in the day-to-day grind that they don't see the warning signs until it's almost too late.
Exactly. And at that point, the options are much more limited and often more painful. So let's talk about those tough decisions. What are some of the things that founders might have to consider if they find themselves staring down that default dead scenario?
It's the moment every founder dreads, right? Facing the music when the numbers just aren't adding up.
Right. And often the first and most difficult step is looking at headcount. Are there roles that are no longer essential or teams that could be restructured?
Layoffs. Ugh. Never easy, but sometimes unavoidable. I've talked to founders who've been through that, and it's always a gut-wrenching experience.
Agreed. And beyond headcount, cutting ad spend is another lever that founders might need to pull, which can feel counterintuitive when you're trying to grow, but sometimes you need to, reduce spending to move forward strategically.
Right, it's like pushing the pause button on growth to reassess and refine your approach. It's about making sure your marketing dollars are actually delivering a return, not just vanishing into the void.
Exactly. And then there's the often dreaded raising prices, which, let's face it, nobody likes to do.
Mhm.
It can feel like you're alienating your customers, but sometimes it's the only way to make the math work, especially if you've been offering steep discounts to attract those early adopters.
And it's a tough pill to swallow, right? You've worked so hard to build that customer base, and the thought of losing them over a price hike can be terrifying.
Of course. But here's the thing. It's about framing those decisions, even the tough ones, as a kind of startup bankruptcy. It sounds dramatic, I know, but it's really about clearing the decks to allow for future sustainable growth.
Right, it's like hitting the reset button. It might be painful in the short term, but it can be the wake-up call that forces you to build a more resilient and ultimately more successful business.
And it's important to remember that the startup world moves fast. What feels like a major setback today can be quickly overcome with the right adjustments and a bit of tenacity. It's about resilience and adaptability above all else.
Speaking of resilience, there's that incredible story of Justin.tv pivoting to become Twitch, which perfectly illustrates this whole default dead scenario and what it takes to pull off a comeback. They were on the verge of collapse, right? Millions of dollars spent, but burning through cash at an alarming rate. What did they do?
They did something incredibly brave and transparent. They called a company-wide meeting and laid it all out there, no sugarcoating. They presented their team with three stark options: continue on the current path and likely crash and burn, try to drastically cut costs and reach a break-even point, or go all in on becoming profitable.
Wow. Talk about a high-stakes meeting, right? To lay it all on the line like that, their entire company's future hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
That takes guts.
It really does. But you know what's even more remarkable? The team's response. Instead of panicking, they rallied around the challenge of becoming profitable. They saw it not as a defeat, but as an opportunity to prove their mettle.
I love that. It's amazing how a shared sense of purpose, that feeling of we're all in this together, can galvanize a team, especially when the stakes are high. So how'd they do it? Did they just start slashing and burning, or was it more nuanced than that?
It was a combination of smart cost cutting and some really savvy revenue generation strategies. They experimented with different monetization models, including introducing pre-roll video ads.
Ah, okay.
That wasn't a universally popular move at the time, but it was a necessary one.
I bet.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to make those tough calls, even if they ruffle a few feathers, right? So all this to say, this startup bankruptcy idea, it actually worked. They turned things around.
They did. In a matter of months, they went from burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to generating over $1 million in profit. A remarkable turnaround. And it really underscores the point that survival is a prerequisite for success. By shifting their focus to becoming default alive, Twitch bought themselves the time and breathing room to figure out their long-term strategy and ultimately thrive.
Which, as we know, led them to become one of, if not the most successful live streaming platforms in the world. They found that elusive product market fit because they didn't give up when the going got tough. They hit the reset button and emerged stronger.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes taking your foot off the gas, even if it means sacrificing some short-term growth, is the smartest move you can make.
So let's bring it all home. We've covered a lot of ground today. What are the key takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the biggest one is this. Survival is paramount. It's about staying in the game long enough to figure out that winning formula, to find that product market fit that allows you to truly scale.
It's about giving yourself the runway to experiment, iterate, and ultimately thrive, not just survive.
Absolutely. And remember, while investors play a crucial role in the startup ecosystem, founders need to own their burn rate and make decisions that are in the best interest of the business, even if those decisions aren't always easy or aligned with investor expectations.
You're the pilot of this plane, even if you've got some passengers with strong opinions.
Exactly. And speaking of taking ownership, let's not forget the importance of understanding your numbers inside and out. This is especially crucial for operationally intensive businesses, where even small inefficiencies can snowball into major problems.
Right, you can't just wing it when you've got a complex machine with a lot of moving parts. You need to know what levers to pull and when.
Precisely. You need to be on top of your unit economics